reports. So if you are interested in independently investigating the blocking of websites and apps in your own country and as part of your own research or as part of your own advocacy, you can do this through the use of OONI Probe. OONI Probe is a free app that we develop at the Open Observatory of Network Interference, and it is available for both desktop and mobile platforms. On mobile platforms, as you can see, you can get it on Android and also on iOS. And we also have a version for F-Droid. You can also get OONI Probe on desktop, on Windows and Mac. And also, if you are interested in running it on Linux, you can also install it from the command line tool that we have available on our website. You can find the links for installing OONI Probe through the install page on our website, which is provided here, the link of which is provided here in the slide. Now, how does OONI Probe work? Well, essentially, OONI Probe, the app, includes many different types of tests, and each test is designed to measure different forms of internet censorship. The main ones that we'll talk about today are those which examine the blocking of websites and the blocking of apps. By apps, specifically, we're referring to two types of apps. On the one hand, we're referring to instant messaging apps. In this case, we specifically have tests which measure the blocking of WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Telegram. And by running these tests, you can check to see whether and to what extent and how these apps are blocked by your local internet service provider. And we also have separate tests which measure the blocking of censorship circumvention tools. So by censorship circumvention tools, we're basically referring to VPNs. And in this case, we have two tests, one that checks the blocking of Siphon, which is a very popular VPN, and one test which checks the blocking of Tor, which provides censorship circumvention, but which also provides online anonymity and privacy and other security properties. So the reason why we provide these last types of tests is because if, for example, you know that WhatsApp is blocked in your country, then the question may be, how can you circumvent the block? How can you use WhatsApp even though it is blocked? In this case, you may be interested in using a VPN like Siphon or a tool like Tor. So that is why it's interesting to know whether or not they are accessible. And also what we have seen around the world is that many governments, in order to prevent people from using VPNs, they resort to blocking them when there are other censorship events going on. So this is why we think it is important to run these tests. Through the OONI Probe app, you will also find speed and performance tests, but I won't get into detail about these tests because we have a separate webinar which is specialized on precisely this, which is facilitated by our colleagues at MLab. If you're curious to learn the details of how each test works, we encourage you to read the test descriptions, which are available through the net test section of our website, which is linked in the slide. In the various test pages, we also provide links to the specific test specifications and relevant code base. So if you decide to install the OONI Probe mobile app, these are some screenshots to give you an idea of what it will look like. Basically, through your app, you will be able to run tests directly, and as soon as you run a test, you will be able to view the test result basically immediately inside the app. Here is an example of testing a specific website and then getting access to the result. When you access the result, in this case it is, for example, piratebay.org, you will first get a high-level summary of the result. In this case, it tells you that it is likely blocked, and it is likely blocked by means of HTTP blocking, and then it provides you some other relevant metadata. If you're interested in accessing the raw measurement data, which can potentially serve as evidence, then on the top right corner of there's the menu icon. If you tap on that, you will then be able to see that you can access the raw data. But also through the test results section of the mobile app, as you can see in the first image, you can gain a bird's eye view of the various test results. And if you run tests on many different networks, then you'll be able to very easily confirm results across networks by viewing that. I guess one very important thing to highlight here is that when you do run OONI Probe, it's important to do that without a VPN enabled, because essentially what it is doing is that it is running the test from your local network. So if, for example, you are running, if you are now connected to the internet by using Airtel in a specific country or using, say, Vodafone in Cameroon, then what you will be measuring is whether a specific website or specific app is accessible or blocked on Vodafone in Cameroon. If you want to check the accessibility on a different network, you will have to connect to that different network in order to perform tests there. But if you run UniProbe over VPN, then you're not connecting to Vodafone in Cameroon, you're connecting to the network provided by your VPN provider, in which case you're not checking whether censorship is implemented locally. You're checking something else, which is why we advise against using VPNs when running UniProbe. That said, it is very important to highlight that UniProbe is not a privacy tool. In fact, it is an investigatory tool. And given that its nature is that of investigating a network and exploring to see if censorship is happening, like any investigatory tool, it does carry some potential risks. If you're interested in learning more about these potential risks in detail, we encourage you to read about them in the risk section of our website, which we have linked in this page. But I guess in summary, the main things to know are the following. First of all, that anyone who is monitoring your internet activity, such as your local internet service provider or your local government, they will know that you are running UniProbe, in the sense that the fact that you are running UniProbe in itself is not hidden. And as mentioned, it's probably best not to run UniProbe over VPN because it'll probably lead to less accurate test results. What this means is that if your threat model is such where you're already under surveillance because, for example, you're a high-profile activist, maybe running UniProbe may not be super safe. So that is something to be aware of. But if you're really concerned and if your threat model is such, we advise speaking to your local lawyers. Another thing to take into account is the types of websites that are tested. By default, when you tap Run on the website's card for website testing in the UniProbe app, you will test a wide range of different types of websites. And some of these websites may be provocative or they may not be so fine to test in certain countries. But this really varies from country to country. For example, some countries, may have anti-pornography laws or, in which case it may be more sensitive to test those websites. Another thing to keep in mind is that by default, OONI measurements, as in the OONI test results from the test that you run, they're automatically openly published. And as mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, the reason why we do this is to increase transparency of internet censorship and to enable researchers and human rights defenders around the world to gain access to the test results and use them as part of their work. However, if you feel uncomfortable with having your test results published, this is something that you can disable. And I guess that brings us to the choices you can make. So in order to minimize or reduce the potential risk that may be associated with your use of UniProbe, depending on your threat model, there are various choices you can make. For starters, I would recommend reading our data policy, which is available on our website and which you can find through the link shared in the slide. And in our data policy, we dive into detail explaining how you can opt out from various forms of data collection. But in short, inside the UniProbe apps themselves, we provide some settings through which you can disable the types of data that are collected, and you can also potentially opt out from sending us any measurements at all. And actually, but on this note, I should probably highlight that we do generally, because we care about user safety, we do generally try to collect as little data as possible. We follow the principle of data minimization in the sense that we only collect data that we feel is necessary for investigating internet censorship, while always taking user safety into consideration. You can read about the data principles that we adhere to in more detail through our data policy. But that is just to say that, if you do choose to use the default settings, it would probably be fine. But if you feel that your threat model is such, then maybe you want to look into the details of the settings and opt out. Then it's a question, of course, of which types of tests you choose to run, because different types of UniProbe tests may carry potentially different type of potential risk. For example, if you run the WhatsApp test, maybe that is less risky than running other tests. Or if you choose to run the websites test, but only test very popular websites or non-controversial websites, then that's probably safer than, say, running the websites test and testing, a bunch of illegal or controversial websites. So it really depends on what you test. And then finally, and on this note, you actually can influence and determine what it is that you're testing. So the default is that when you run the UniProbe websites test, the question is, which websites are you even testing? So the websites that you would be testing are the ones that are included in what we call the test lists, the Citizen Lab test lists. And these are hosted by the Citizen Lab, which is a research group at the University of Toronto. And these lists are openly available on GitHub, and you can access them through the links provided in the slide. And essentially, we have two types of lists. On the one hand, we have what we call a global list, which includes internationally relevant websites and includes sites like Facebook.com, BBC, and so on. And then we have country-specific lists, which includes websites that are relevant to a specific country. We probably don't have, we don't have a list for every single country around the world, but we do have for most or many. And the reason why these lists are publicly available is so that you can review them. And if there are other websites that should be tested, but which are not included, you can propose adding those websites. And likewise, if there are other websites that you think shouldn't be tested, you can share your opinion and propose having them removed. So if you are interested in contributing to test lists, and this is something I definitely recommend, you can learn how to do that through the guide, which is provided here in the slide, but which also we link to through our website. And essentially, we think this is very important because essentially the results you will get from website testing greatly depend on which websites are tested. So for example, if there are important websites that are blocked, but those websites are not being tested, then we won't have relevant data, we won't have relevant results on their blocking. And we feel that knowing which websites to test is very tricky because it greatly depends on the laws, the context, the political environment of a country. So this varies from country to country. And that is why we invite you as sort of experts of your own countries to tell us and to contribute to this list and let us know which websites you think should be tested in your country. Otherwise, if you would like to not test the default websites that are included in these test lists, you can also directly choose the websites that you want to test directly through the UniProbe app. So in the UniProbe mobile app, if you tap on the websites card, there is a button which says Choose Websites. If you tap on the Choose Websites button, you will see a page like the one provided here on the left, where you can literally add the websites you want to test and then test them on the spot. That way, you have full control over which websites you're testing, and you can limit your testing to the websites that you feel comfortable with. Another thing you can do is that you can choose which categories of websites you want to test. So again, through the websites card in the UniProbe mobile app, it has settings, and the settings of the website card essentially display the 30 different categories, the 31 different categories of websites. This is based on the Citizen Lab test list mentioned before. And so if, for example, you are only interested in testing news media, you can disable all the other categories and only test media. If, for example, you're interested in testing all of the categories, except for a few categories that maybe are a bit more controversial to test in your country, you can disable them. So long story short, you can tweak and customize your testing depending on what you feel comfortable with, depending on your threat model, and depending on your research and advocacy goals.